Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We normally have these webinars in the afternoons, but today we've got our board meeting, so we're having it in the morning. And in case, we would love to ask that we record the proceedings, which will be made available to everybody at a later stage on the ISER YouTube channel, as well as other online platforms. My name is Nhlanhla Cyril Mbatha. I'm the hosting chair for this morning. Thank you for making the time to join this joint IWR-ISER webinar for one of the most important research and policy discussions around research methodology and methods. This is about an adaptive systemic approach to community-led engaged research. As indicated on the invite, just in part, this is a novel, practical, integrative context and theory-based approach. Among other things, it aims to ensure that scientific research achieves true socio-ecological justice. The Institute for Water Research at Rhodes University is working with partner institutions across the African continent to achieve a successful application of the approach that applies transformative, transdisciplinary, and community-engaged processes. The ISER, on the other hand, is very excited to partner with the IWR and host such a presentation and discussion, which also fits in very well with most of our research focus areas. And those areas, research focus areas at the ISER include environmental resources management with a focus on land and water reform policies. Two, a focus area on education and skills development with a focus on technical skills, especially for the youth. And three, human and economic development research area with a focus on the quality of life, even rural development. And lastly, we focus on research on cross-border trade, including research on AGOA, research on the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. As with the discussion this morning, we welcome collaborations on the areas mentioned in formats from those in formats including the webinar or research collaborations from anybody in the audience. Please do visit our ISER website on the Rhodes University's website for more details on these areas and how to contact us. On today's presentation, the presenter and the respondent, we're very pleased to have Professor Tali Palmer of the IWR as our key and lead presenter. Tali is currently in Rwanda. So this is really a technological miracle that we can host this webinar. And then we have as our respondent, Dr. Nontutuzelo Gola of SANBI as the formal respondent to the presented ideas. Professor Tali Palmer is director of the Institute for Water Research, IWR, and the African Research University Alliance, ARUA, Water Center of Excellence at Rhodes University. She's seminal leader in the field of engaged transdisciplinary research and complicity-based systems-based approaches to integrated water resources management. Professor Palmer helped to draft the 1998 South African National Water Act. She also was director of the Institute for Water and Environmental Resource Management at Sydney University of Technology in Australia. She was also executive director of Applied Research and Innovation at the NRF, and for many years led the Unilever Center for Environmental Water Quality. So you can hear that everything, she's really is the water champion. And illustratively, Professor Palmer's sustainable engaged approach to transdisciplinary research over the years has also ensured that at today's seminar, she has two of her former students in this panel, both myself from economics and Dr. Nontutuzelo Gola from water science, were supervised or co-supervised by Professor Palmer. To learn from the South African water policy and act from engaging discussions with Tali as a student changed my personal developmental academic path forever. In some ways, we have come full circle and achieved some of the things we set out to do almost 20 years ago. Dr. Nontutuzelo Gola, the respondent to Professor Palmer, currently the ecological infrastructure coordinator for the Greater Umgeni catchment under the Ecological Infrastructure for Water Security Project at the South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI. Dr. Gola holds a PhD in water resources science from Rhodes University, as I've mentioned. One of her key responsibilities is to support the coordination and continued functioning of the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership. In her world of application of science, the work requires communities to take up engaged leadership roles in revitalizing and protecting natural resources with investments from all stakeholders. She's in the most appropriate position, therefore, to respond to discussions on the novel and innovative ideas about engaging and empowering communities to take over research outputs and apply them sustainably in their lives. We are therefore pleased and lucky to have Dr. Gola as our respondent today. Okay, so those were our speakers today and our respondent. Some processes and rules for the webinar as we go along. The presentations should take us about 25 to 30 minutes by Professor Palmer. And this will then be immediately followed by responses from Dr. Gola. This will then be followed by our discussion time with questions and comments from everybody. Throughout both presentation and response, please write down your questions in the question and answer box on your screens. Please do not use the chat. And then depending on the number of questions, I will either read out the questions or ask the persons who ask the questions to state their questions themselves, just in case also it's not clear to me what the question really is. If the written questions are not clear to me or the presenters, then I will definitely do that as well. Ask the person to come, ask for the person to be brought onto the platform to ask for themselves. We will do this only through only through audio. So do not worry about us activating the video. So you don't have to worry really about your visual background. There, it will just be your audio so you can talk through. The discussion with comments, questions, and answers will then take us to the end of the webinar, which we plan to be not more than an hour and 30 minutes. With all of that mouthful, I would like to then invite Professor Palmer and then thereafter Dr. Gola for the presentation. Thank you, Professor Palmer, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Mbatha. What a delight to be with you. As you can see in a sunny Rwanda, we've had cloud for quite a few.
I'm not sure there if we've lost the
few
connection.
days and the sun has come out. We're living in a really attractive area with a house being built on the other side. So I've got something that says to me, host disabled participant screen sharing. So I wonder if I could be allowed to share.
Yes, please.
Yeah, you have to enable me to share. It says you have disabled my screen share.
All right.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're done. Right. Sorry, I'm struggling to change slides. Can you, Tamron, can you help me change slides? I'm not changing slides.
Just use your arrow keys.
I am.
Okay, it's not moving. You should be able to do it through the slideshow.
Yeah, sorry, it's not doing it. Yeah, I need a mouse.
Okay, if you can stop sharing, I'll share it for you.
Thank you. Okay.
Let me just bring it up. Oh.
Now that's.
Sorry, just clicked on the wrong
Okay.
one.
I think to everyone, no matter how often we practice these things, there are unaccountable glitches.
There we go.
No, oh, there we go. Right, here we are. So, an adaptive systemic approach to community-led engaged research. And right there in the title is where we need to start, because when I shared the title with Nhlanhla, it came back to me as systematic. And it's really important that, because we live in a world where being systematic is extremely valuable. It's complicated, it's difficult, and we have to work in a really systematic way. But we also very badly need to work in a systemic way. And systemic way means we put things together and we understand them as a whole system rather than as a set of blocks. And Tamron, sorry, but I've lost my, when you're no longer showing my presentation, you're showing the ISER invitation.
I'm sorting it out now. We're just having a little trouble with the slide share here. I'm gonna have to do it like this. Can you see it?
Yes, thanks very much. And
Okay.
if we can change slide. Oh, and can we go to the it's not on the full screen. It's not on slideshow, so it needs to be on slide.
I was having trouble actually changing it on slideshows. So if everyone can see it like this, can we stay like this?
Follow this, we can also follow, and then maybe Tali can just see which slide on the left to go to, but I can see it, it's quite big enough for me.
Okay, if we can just go back one slide. Thank you. Right. Quite a long time ago, I promised myself that every presentation I made, I would use this slide. So some of you who know me will have seen it many times. But the thing is that there is something that connects us all as humans, us with every single human being on the planet, is that because we need water and depend on it, we all live on a piece of land that collects and catches water called a catchment. And so the way catchments work and the way water connects people is a fundamental human experience. Next slide, thank you. Now, the thing is that in a world with high populations, high demands, high growth, we have intractable, difficult problems related to water. And one of the reasons for this is that water does, by its nature, connect and integrate things. And it throws up for us the human challenge that we try and communicate to our children from when they're really young. When kiddies are in the sandpit, and I have had children and have grandchildren at the moment, they are very quick to see the desired object and quite slow to share it. And we try and teach them that sharing is a good thing, but we abandon the value of sharing really quickly as soon as we have the power to retain what we want. And so the fundamental challenge is that people cannot at the same time in the same system have everything. You can't profit from overusing and wasting water and polluting it, and also experience the aesthetic, spiritual, and biodiversity benefits that come from protecting systems. We have to look spatially and through time at sharing. And it's hard, and conflict is likely, and power and wealth are uneven. And local people, who are the people who live in catchments, are very often the last and the least to benefit from water resource development. And it was these intractable problems through a career in protecting water resources and using water resources that led to this drive of saying, surely we can do it better. Next slide, thank you. So I'm going to jump you forward right now, in that we have at Rhodes, we are the host of the ARUA Water Center of Excellence. Next slide. And what we're trying to do is, across the continent, is address these complex water and land problems together. And so, as you can see, we have a wide array of universities and countries who are working together, and in a project that in this instance is funded by the UK Research and Innovation. And we have partners in the UK at Lancaster and Sheffield. Thank you. So here we go. This is what we came to. This is what we developed in order to win this grant. And we've called it the adaptive systemic approach. And we focus on research that enables just and sustainable natural resource development. Now, the thing is that the quote here is from the paper, and you can see the co-authors, and it's a paper that's currently under review in Environmental Science and Policy. Sustainable development, which is such a catchphrase among economists and ecologists alike, remains elusive. And natural resource development, such as water infrastructure construction, has often externalized costs, both to the environment and vulnerable people. And so social ecological justice is to push back against this exploitative notion of deriving benefit from natural resources for the few, disadvantaging very often the people who live closely to that resource. Thank you. And the project is called Unlocking Resilient Benefits from African Water Resources, and we've called it RESBEN. Thank you. So RESBEN brings these partners together from 6 universities across Africa and 3 in South Africa. The 3 in South Africa contribute learning sites from research that has already been funded in South Africa. And we focus on SDG 6 because SDG 6 says or encapsulates the goals of equity that we're hoping to get to. And water always involves a consideration of access to water and benefiting from the quantity of water, but also the quality of water and the question of pollution. Because when you pollute the water you have, you restrict the use that you can make of it. And then underpinning all of these uses of water is the governance of water, which is often weak and fragmentary and with very little local voice or local influence into governance. So we have SDG 6 at the center. We have people looking at pollution with communities, Lagos in groundwater, Kampala in surface water, in channels in Kampala linking to Lake Victoria, and the Akagera River here in Rwanda, where their speciality is biomonitoring, which will link and aquatic biodiversity, looking at indicators from that. And on the quantity side, in Tanzania, we're looking at conflict between or sharing between hydropower, irrigation, and small-scale farmers. In Senegal, we have huge dam infrastructure that are across country boundaries. And so we're looking at forefronting local stakeholders in transboundary water development. And then up in Ethiopia, they have fantastic case studies on restoring catchments, but they're looking at upscaling landscape restoration and the use of shallow groundwater. So it's a big ask, and this is what we're trying to do. Next slide. Here's a quick picture of the fact that you can imagine the SDGs linking all of the other SDGs. So on the left-hand side, you have a set of the SDGs around land and water protection, people in relation to land. And on the right-hand side, you have all of the city and use-based SDGs. So in a cycle, in a mutually supporting cycle, you have all the environmental concerns and all of the use concerns around water SDG. And if we achieve, or if we move towards those SDGs, you start to reach the high level SDG outcomes of hunger and poverty. Thank you. Now, if you're in the business of research, as we are, and you operate inside a university, and you want to reach into and connect with people, with users, with local people and business users and national policy, you have to be able to do two things. You have to be able to satisfy an academic requirement for theoretically sound thinking, but you also have to be able to implement these ideas in a very practical way. And so what I'm going to do this morning is to fairly quickly share with you the theoretical ideas that underpin this practical way of looking at complex water problems. And the first area of theory is this notion of complexity. There's a huge body of research on complex systems and how complex systems work. And what you see in the text are some of the characteristics of any complex system, from a single cell in your body to a planetary system. Complex systems have many elements. And when we think of catchments, those elements are both biophysical, the land and water and all the things that live in it, and social, all of the people. The things that happen in complex systems are non-linear. They don't go simply with one variable related to another. They are very often many different kinds of process relationships characterized by feedbacks and affected by scale. And because of this, when you intervene, you can have a small change that has a large effect depending on the feedback relationships, or you can put a huge amount of effort in and only have a small impact. And there are always surprises. And all of the processes are deeply context specific. Context is critical. And since context is critical, you have to have an understanding of the history, because the system as it is driven by the history from which it's come. And so has emerged this theoretical understanding of complex social ecological systems, where we recognize that people and society is a complex system, and there are many people who study that complex system. And in the same way, ecosystems are complex systems. That what we're interested in is the interaction. When you place, or as you consider people living in their biophysical context, you are looking at all of the elements in a combined, complex, social ecological system. Next slide, please. Now, if you're going to do that, you cannot exclude any kind of knowledge, because you're trying to understand something really difficult. And what we call transdisciplinary research and practice, which also has its own literature, there are three founding principles that are not usual in the way we usually do research. And the first one is especially unusual in academic and university contexts. Respect and include the widest range of forms, working across academic disciplines, taking account of local and personal knowledge, taking account of cultural and societal knowledge, and not privileging one above the other. I come from a science background, so I live in a world that has privileged scientific knowledge, even though excellent science is completely necessary, but answers quite a narrow range of questions. Then transdisciplinarity is problem-focused. It says there are many complex problems that are difficult to solve exactly because they are complex, and they are called wicked or intractable problems. They're characterized by no single solution can make a difference, and many concurrent solutions or activities on interventions are necessary, and every single intervention has uncertain outcomes. And they're terrifically characteristic of the Anthropocene, of the time in which we live. And thirdly, this is research that is done with and for society. So it is partnered with the people who are experiencing the problem, and it is designed to engage them and as many players as you can to work towards a better condition of their complex problem. We don't talk about solutions because there aren't easy solutions. There's a shift in the system in a direction towards one that you're hoping to go. Thank you. And thirdly, is this recognition that we learn from each other. And that as we learn from each other in social learning, this kind of learning can be transformative in that it can accelerate and catalyze change, and it can be transgressive. And the word transgressive calls into mind the boundaries that we need to hit against, the boundaries of poverty, of elitism, of the things that keep us separate, gender-related studies. So transgression means to look at the boundaries, excuse me, to consider the boundaries that constrain our societies in terms of equity and sustainability. Now at Rhodes, we have one of the T-learning or T-social learning world leaders, Prof. Nhlanhla. And you're going to have to excuse me for a minute because I'm on my own here, but I badly need a glass of water. So if you just wait 1 second. Thank you. So, Nhlanhla has very recently published, and she runs a research center that investigates transformative and transgressive social learning. And this means learning for transformation, advocacy, and catalyzing change. It calls us to be conscious of the way we learn, to pay attention to the continuous process of learning. And this means to take time to reflect and consider from successes and failures how learning happens, to accept that co-learning with people is really important. And finally, to exercise courage. None of what I'm saying is particularly usual, and it takes courage to keep working in this way. It also takes courage because it takes time to work in this way. And we live in a society that drives us to what they call efficiency, but efficiency is not always effective, and it's very seldom kind. Thank you. Now, this is a very brief thumbnail of my experience of putting theory into practice, and I'm actually going to jump right over it. Thank you to the next one. Now, here's a we've used for some time that carries some of the ideas that I've been talking to you about. So we want to move towards an adaptive systemic practice, because adaptive is a characteristic you need for navigating these complex systems, and you have to take systems into approach. So we're moving towards being adaptive and practical. And the central line is some of the tools where you look at integration, reflection, collaboration, and paying attention to the design of what you're doing in your research and in your connectivity. Now you're going to need, it's called the fishbone model because of the numbers of elements coming off the side. You're going to need some, it's useful to have some academic thinking, and we are talking about research. So here's a list of some of the research areas that are useful: complexity, systems thinking, strategic adaptive management, resilience, political ecology, citizen science. Again, each of these has a rich literature. And so if you look at the top right hand, you're talking about researchers in particular disciplines, but coming together with new ideas, approaches, concepts, and methods, creating a new discourse. Now, this has to happen interactively if we take that social learning thread of this adaptive systemic approach. And there's a range of people in any given problem that you need to take account of. You need to take account of your national, regional, and local government, your natural resource management agencies, the people who use water, right from domestic users, use water and land, from local emerging farmers. And then you need to take account of the people who experience the problem, the stakeholders, residents, communities, and civil society. So this is a simplified picture of our playground. Thank you. This is a diagram that you might, if you're interested in this, come back to, because it holds quite a lot of information and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if we look at the center, this is what we want. We want transformative, engaged research that supports ethical and sustainable development towards social ecological justice. Now that's a big call. And
have we lost Tali there?
Yes, hopefully she'll return shortly.
I just want to say, you know, as we wait for Tali, hopefully she comes back. We've actually put somebody just on standby so that they can take over Tali's presentation in case this were to happen in Rwanda. I wonder if the standby person is there.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I am.
Do you want to just take, maybe go ahead? I'll be communicating with Tali over the phone. Maybe you can just continue on this slide.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say that I am a bit overwhelmed because Tali is such a terrific communicator and she lives and breathes this project and she explains really well. And I am not gonna do justice, but I'm gonna try my best. So Tali was trying to say that the key objective of this project, the big vision, is that we promote research that engages with the different parts of the systems that she was explaining, that it transforms the unjust conditions, and that supports ethical and sustainable development. That's the big ethos and vision of the project. And we can only do that by constantly acting, but reflecting on the way the actions are working. And if the actions that we are doing to change, to influence the systems, they don't work, is how we plan to redesign them in a way that they work better. Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? So the project, the adaptive systems approach, has 4 key steps, and this slide is a summary of the steps. So the first step is the bound step, is when you bring the different stakeholders together. I will explain that a bit better later. The second step is the planning process, how we are going to plan the project in a way that takes into account the many factors that they can go well, also they can go badly. The third step is actually taking the research and monitoring how it goes. But the fourth step focuses more on the monitoring and evaluation. And if things don't go according to plan, as I said before, is how we actually change them. But monitoring and evaluation is not only on the fourth step, it actually comes across in all the different steps. Thank you. Can we go to the next one? So the first step, and it's really, really important, is the bound. How we bring the glue of the system. I say glue because if you remember the slide was Tali was talking about the complexity of the systems, and when I say the glue, is how we bring people, the different stakeholders, those who live and work in particular places, catchments, and how we bring insights of the ecosystem. So here is about identifying the research questions, but very important, identifying the stakeholders. So who is affected by the problem? Who is more interested? Who could have power and influence to make change happen? So it's essential in that step to bring all those stakeholders together. And Tali always emphasizes that bringing members of the community is really important, and civil society, their wisdom has to be taken into account. Also in the BOUND project, it's really important to think about the scope of the project. What is the time we have? What is the space, the geographical and associated governance? And what are the links between the different stakeholders? This is really important if we want. The more we preempt, the more ready we will be to adapt to the unknowns of the project. As Tali was emphasizing, this stage is really influenced by theory and transdisciplinarity. Thank you. Can we go to the next slide?
I don't know if you want me to come back.
Yes, please. We are in the state.
Anna, thank you so much. Yes, I see it heated and closed itself. So here I am next to a fan and under a mosquito net. Thanks, Anna, so much. So once we've brought the stakeholders together and explored the context, because we know context is so important, we work together for the stakeholders to listen to each other. It's really important to get that whole range of stakeholders together. And we face enormous challenges now in COVID, where face-to-face meetings are so difficult. So there's a really nice little handbook that we've referenced at the end that explains how we run an adaptive planning process. But importantly, we share values because actually our actions emerge from our values. And if stakeholders and actors in the system have shared values, they can go back to those shared values when conflict arises. It's a really important step to have articulated values. And then more pragmatically, we can put together what we know about the social, technical, economic, ecological, and political system that we're working in. We can collectively look at the research question and frame it in ways that make sense to all the actors, and then build the beginnings of an objectives hierarchy that says we would like to work in particular ways, and these are the steps that we need to take. So this is the, if you like, the kickoff of working together. Next slide. Then we do three things all at the same time. You've got these big research teams, and the researchers who are looking at the biophysical problem go away and do that. So we ask, what disciplines do we need to address these problems of water sharing? We need hydrologists, we need water quality specialists. But what we want is those specialists who are willing to be both committed to their disciplinary excellence, but also who buy into and are willing to sacrifice what it takes to work together. And these are the transaction costs of transdisciplinary engaged research. Next slide. Now, if we want local people to have a voice, we have to get involved in participatory governance development. Every single research project comes to an end. And what does it leave behind? If, as part of the research process, local people are connected to their own governance system. And if they have worked together in places where you have enabled local voices to be heard, maybe we can leave behind voice and capability influencing the decisions that affect local people. And we call this stakeholder empowerment. Next slide. We also, this is the kind of academic term is polycentric governance. Many of you know what that means. And this slide, if you want to go back to it, unpacks some of the terminology around polycentric governance and places participatory governance in relation to formal and traditional governance, where power is always the wild card. Next slide. One of our ways of working has been to develop a participatory governance capability pathway. How do you take local people from a feeling of no agency and not being able to affect what happens to them to having some effective participatory role? And one of the ways is that you level the knowledge playing field. You move towards co-knowing. You listen and speak with each other, and you plan together. You learn about influence and the political landscape you're working in, and ultimately you move towards deciding together. And as you move through time, these phases of development feed back and interact. And we're busy writing that up in one of our projects. Next slide. And finally, this is also something that's really important, is that you work with your formal institutions to know about and understand strategic adaptive management, which basically tells you how to manage in a way that you can take account of your learning and go back and enact it. You take responsibility for particular actions, you set indicators, and you reflect and evaluate. And again, this is a practice that takes practice. So we work in this way. Now, research funders require rigorous and onerous monitoring and evaluation. And what we try and do is to turn this from an onerous task into a really useful tool by making sure that our monitoring and evaluation is participatory, we do it together, and that we reflect together and learn from our evaluations and our self-evaluations. And so we call that PMO. So research, governance development, SAM and PMO, this is the meat of the project rolling on through the middle of it. Next slide. And we hope it works. We're trying it out. The CITSA project has practiced some of the components and other projects have. But finally, I go back to that first slide where we all live on the planet together. And our goal is to harness knowledge, to work with people to make a difference. Next slide. And that's really quite simple because it's thanks very much. Okay, over to you and back to Prof. Mbatha. And thanks for your patience.
Hi there, I'm trying to come in. Am I coming in? All right. First, let me thank Professor Tali Palmer. That was really nice, really, really great. I'll just say in a few minutes what I think I've just picked up, and I know we've had a very much longer period of learning and co-learning and relearning from one another. So this might be unfair to people who are hearing you for the first time. But I would also like to say many great thanks to Dr. Anna Poroshe Escudero. That was really great to just jump up like that with the difficulties, challenges posed by the technology. They weren't too big, but they were there, and certainly that was really a nice rescue there on your side. We much appreciate that. Tali, I feel like this approach is not just a deliberate decision to co-learn, to relearn as a researcher, but also a sort of character-based approach about somebody's really personal attributes about how they see a research process. One of the things that I found very useful in your code, also in your presentation, is around complex systems. And I think complex systems theory for me is really one of the most binding factors of transdisciplinary research. So yeah, in my own learning and relearning and core learning processes, Tali quotes Cilius in 2000. Cilius talks about the breaking points, social systems or different types of systems having their own breaking points over time. And it's just that yesterday we were listening to the budget speech. And I thought to myself, listening to the budget speech in South Africa, that in economics, probably the fiscal cliff that is seemingly coming closer and closer, where our national budget is just going to spiral out of control. We're going to spiral into debt, and it's going to be almost impossible to get ourselves out of that hole, is one of those breaking points that an economic system is about to face. So in different sort of like disciplines, one has to be looking for these patterns, these social complex systems pattern or socio-ecological system as patterns of various breaking points. And the longer it takes for us to reach that breaking point, I feel that characterizes the system as being resilient, resisting moving towards that breaking point. And sometimes that breaking point could be a desirable point. So we would be desiring, for example, or having a vision to get ourselves beyond that breaking point. But if a system is resilient to change, then either for the good or for the bad, then it means more effort for us and more learning, irrespective of what kind of a system that is. So really, when you're talking about these ideas, I'm sort of like, my mind is just trying to make all these connections with different systems, especially from my discipline of economics and looking at the sort of like cohesive thread that binds systems, especially for researchers who are working in transdisciplinary work, as it is the case with the team that we set up to work across the different countries in Africa. Very, very exciting to hear you. Let us hear from Dr. Gola. Dr. Gola has actually prepared a formal presentation for us, a formal response, and I would like for her to respond to Tali in terms of her own work. As I've stated in the beginning, Dr. Gola works in the Umgeni catchment, and she works with people on the ground. In our brief discussions with her, I've asked her to look at some of the ideas that Tali is putting on board or in the presentation, and for her to start making us think about how some of these ideas could be applicable in a practical system in South Africa, in the catchment, working very closely with the stakeholders in that catchment. Over to you, Dr. Gola.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give this response. This is such exciting work by Professor Palmer. Before I start, I'm just going to apologize in advance for any background noise that you might hear. I work in a botanical garden, so there's a lot of activity around me. So if there's any background noise, I do apologize in advance. My name is Pearl Gola. People call me Nontutuzelo, or they call me Pearl. I am the Ecological Infrastructure Coordinator for the Greater Umgeni Catchment, employed by the South African National Biodiversity Institute. We are part of a project known as the Ecological Infrastructure for Water Security Project, that is funded by the Global Environmental Facility. So in me starting to think about this exciting work that Prof. Tali and the team is embarking on, I think in pictures. So I immediately jumped to the picture and I wanted to interact with the picture that you see on the screen. And the steps that are on that picture. And I just had a couple of thoughts when I was looking at that picture and reading the background information, and I was fortunate enough to read the paper that Prof. Tali is preparing. So when I was looking at it, one of the first things that kind of like jumped at me is that we talk a lot about you know, engaging stakeholders, you know, and speaking to people. And one of my colleagues, Miss Michelle Histerman, always drums into my head that before you even like launch into speaking to people, there's a stakeholder mapping process that needs to happen. And that stakeholder mapping process does help you to determine who you speak to and how you speak to them. Because you kind of like don't use the same language with the people that you speak to. So it's quite important to know upfront who you're going to speak to and how you're going to engage them. And the other thing that's kind of like sparked into my mind was looking at these governance systems. Is that in South Africa we've got statutory governance systems, which are like your formal governance systems, and we've in the last while, we've had a lot of non-statutory governing systems that are going beyond the states. So there's networks that form that go beyond the states because things have to be done and decisions have to be made at a local level. So that was my thinking that came through when I was looking at the first step of bounding. In the picture, and looking at the second step of this picture that talks about adaptive planning. For me, one of the things that came to my mind is when you're doing that kind of adaptive planning, it's important to identify any tensions, because there's bound to be tensions in a system, because these systems, you know, they're very complex. So identifying the tensions quite upfront as early as you can, so that you can engage with those tensions throughout the process. And also, as you try and articulate your morning evaluation, reflection, learning framework, you look at the value proposition, and we've been getting a lot of that. What is the value proposition for the people that you are working with, the people that you are talking to, and looking at qualitative and quantitative value while you're looking at that. And I guess one of the things that are really sort of close to my heart is this research that is rooted in practice. Thinking about practice as you plan your research has been sort of my guiding principle in the last while. If we're going to do this kind of adaptive systematic approach, we actually need to be thinking a whole lot more about the research that is rooted in practice. And when we talk about participatory governance, we should be looking more at partnerships, not just having people work together, but having people partner to work together, because then that becomes a long-term, that builds long-term relationships and trust. And in that, and it allows people to collaborate, coordinate, and co-learn in the process of working. So it does not become just a matter of one project. It becomes a way of working. And also when we're doing this kind of transdisciplinary research, there is information that's being generated in that process. Now, how do we manage that information and how do we share that information with our stakeholders is very important. So those are the things for me that kind of like the thoughts that were sparked by as I was reading the paper. So these thoughts, as they were sparked, they kind of like allowed me to think about my own work and the space that I work in. And Tali mentioned that we all live in a catchment, which is true. And the catchments are really the most appropriate level of water resource governance and management. So the catchment that I live and work in is the Umgeni catchment in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. I've been at this catchment for quite a number of years. I can't even remember how long. One of the things that allows me to work in this catchment is the partnerships that have emerged in this catchment, and particularly the partnership that I coordinate and am a part of, which is the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership, which is it's a catchment level partnership of a number of organizations. It's quite a semi-formal partnership where we have a memorandum of understanding of more than 15 organizations at the moment, with defined strategic objectives of what we want as partners. And we are partners from different organizations, from government, academia, civil society, business. So it's quite a range of organizations, and we have come together and we defined our own objectives as the partnership of where we want to go and how we want to get there. And in this context of a partnership, participatory research has become really important, where we come together as partners and try and figure out what is it that we want to do in terms of research. What are the questions that we want answered in the catchment and as catchment stakeholders? And one of our initial works as a catchment partnership was this investment plan for securing ecological infrastructure for the catchment, where we were looking at the entire catchment and saying, if we wanted to invest in ecological infrastructure for the catchment, what would be the benefits that we would be looking at? Sort of like your ecosystem services that we would be looking at. And we had to pick some because there's a whole range of ecosystem services that one derives from ecological infrastructure. So we looked at an increased base flow, increased stream flow, sediment, and water quality. And we looked across the catchment, and we sort of said, if we were to put interventions that allow us to increase base flow in the catchment, where in this catchment would we go and do those interventions? So this is what the investment was about, what to do where on the catchment. And this was a participatory approach where everybody gave input into this process. And aligned to that process, while we were talking investment, we can't talk investment without talking money. So aligned to the process of saying, when we actually are investing in the catchment, where would we go? The other question that arose was, where would we get the money? And then we had a parallel process of looking at where would the money for investing in a catchment come from. And we had WWF leading the process of looking at the possible avenues for financing investment in ecological infrastructure in the catchment. So this really shows that we as catchment stakeholders, we're answering different questions with different projects being led by different stakeholders or organizations in the partnership. And it was quite a participatory process. that we were running. And then we also, as a partnership led by the Department of Environmental Affairs, we ran a process of a theory of change for the entire catchment. And that was led by Kate Pringle from the Institute of Natural Resources. But that process, even though it was led by the INR, it was also a catchment process, and stakeholders of the catchment were fully embedded and involved in shaping that process and where we as catchment stakeholders want to go, what we want to do, what is our catchment vision. And all of this happens in the absence of your formal governance systems that would allow us to do this. Because had we had something like a catchment management agency, they would probably have led this process. But in the absence of that, it did not mean that as stakeholders, we fold our arms and wait and wait for, you know, the formal governance systems to be established. We had to do something in terms of shaping our catchment while we wait for those formal processes. And there was also some work that was quite an eye-opener that was done by Kate Pringle and Dr. Stuart Hill from UKZN and a team from Germany that looked at our governance systems and in the catchment. And it was quite eye-opening to have a look at what what somebody who is outside our catchment sees when they look at our catchment. So they see these statutory bodies that are there in the catchment, but they're also non-statutory bodies. There's also a hierarchical path of governance, but there's also a network of governance that's emerging in the catchment. And that's the picture of a complex system. So when Tali says we work in complexity, we really do work in complexity, and we need to actually embrace that complexity and figure out where the gaps are. And we can't do that as a single organization or as a single individual. That truly becomes transdisciplinary. It truly becomes participatory. It truly becomes a whole all hands on deck approach where you all different eyes look at what the system looks like, and we all form a picture. And I think one of my favorite works was this picture, which I'm not going to go into. It was part of a WRC project that was a 5-year project that was also done under the banner of the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership led by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And one of the things that they did as part of the project was Kathy Sutherland came up with what she calls a water society space trilectic. So how does water, society, and space interact? For me, this is probably one of my favorite ways of looking at complexity in a catchment, is how all of these things interplay and interact, and having a deep dive into how it all plays out in the space that is the catchment. These are just examples for me, trying to show how participatory research can come into the different types of outcomes and outputs when people work together. And I think one of the fortunate positions that I'm in is that I'm in a catchment where the first thing that was done was to build a partnership and build the trust among stakeholders. And then out of that partnership embarks on projects. So already as the project starts, it's already participatory because it's coined by a partnership, and it's coined through partnership. So I think that some of the conclusions that I sort of came up with when I was thinking about the paper and this work that Tali is embarking on was the importance of enhancing capacity of stakeholders for sustainability of any project. So your stakeholders need to be capacitated if you have any chance of having your project being sustainable after the project is finished. Local context is also very important. And you need to consider the available resources in terms of what available human resources are there and what available financial resources are there, so that you know where to plug your gaps. And that's a very important thing to consider in a meaningful participatory process. And lastly, if you're looking at working in a participatory manner, practical implementation of any project or any research and sustainability beyond the project lifespan should be considered quite early in the planning stages. As you plan, you have to be thinking about how is this going to be sustainable and how is this going to be implemented. And you can't do that without planning with your implementers. So as you plan, you have your implementers in the room to say, how is this going to be implemented? Because I think we've gone beyond, way beyond that stage where we do research and then we give it to somebody to implement. So we are at a stage where we have our implementers in the room where we design these projects so that they can poke holes at saying, no, this is not going to work because we don't have these kind of resources, or we don't have this kind of capacity, or this is how we should do it, and so on and so on. So that was just my thinking around this work and sharing the experiences from the work that I do related to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gola. That was very useful and very helpful, very insightful, and very much based on the work that many people are familiar with on the ground. I think in your work environment of trying to get stakeholders to invest, especially financially, in infrastructure, the ideas of co-knowing what is at stake, then cohesion towards a desired vision is very crucial. Colleagues, it is very clear to me that for the most part, this is not just a desktop literature review type of research or even big data set analysis type of research, but in these proposals, especially from our main speaker, Professor Palmer, the researcher herself or himself has to be a part of the data that is being analyzed, or that is part of the process of change of analysis. Tali, I'm wondering whether or not you would want, you may want to address some of the responses that have come from Nontutuzelo, or maybe for some clarity.
Nontutuzelo, thank you. What a treat to listen to the work you're doing. I think what Nontutuzelo can give us is, or has given us, is this recognition of what it means to grapple with living in a complex catchment. I mean, the Mgeni is huge. There are multiple informal settlements. There are big rural communities. There are big industrial centers. There's massive pollution. We have very few sewage treatment works that are working well. And the willingness of the researcher to move into these spaces, to elicit trust, to work with, and at the same time to work with funders who are expecting quick results is enormous. So what I want to say is that it's so encouraging in this kind of forum
to hear of the other big projects that are grappling in this way. The Department of Environmental Affairs and Forestry has invested in the Tsitsa project, which has quite a similar way of working, and it's a project where I learned a lot. But Pearl, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed you forefronting some of the ideas that I raised and deepening them. So I think that was a really nice coherence in putting what we were saying together. I think you will hear that both of us have a very similar kind of perspective and take on doing this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Colleagues, everybody in the audience, we are now going to open up for discussions on your questions and comments to these both the presentations. Could you please, I'm just going to go through the questions by the sequence that we've received them. Please don't use the chat, but please use the Q&A box when you sort of like take your mouse and hover around the bottom of your screen. You will see there's a Q&A there, and then just put your questions as well as comments in that particular box. I probably can start, maybe I can see that there are already some questions that have come through, colleagues. I'm wondering if we can maybe ask so that for the benefit of everybody, so if we could ask Kwanele Siongo to just state his or her question to the benefit of the whole audience, and then we can have that discussion there. Tamrin, are you able to enable Kwanele to come live?
Yes, I've allowed Kwanele to talk.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This was extremely insightful, and it's very interesting work done. Thank you for the presentations. I appreciated them. I just wanted to know, because I know Prof. Tali mentioned the strategic adaptive management and the PML, participatory monitoring and evaluating. So I asked her, like, in terms of like, if we go to, for example, a local community, and we say that, okay, this is the work that we're doing to try and hash out the injustices that are happening, and we do the work, how then do we go back to this community and monitor, like practically, like a feasible monitoring and evaluating solution? Because I know that there are many times where monitoring hasn't been too feasible, or it just falls apart in that sense. So that's what I really wanted to gauge and know.
Thank you. Tali?
Cornelia, thank you. That's a really pertinent question. And the answer that I wrote was quite superficial. Now, what we do is during the course of the project, so the PMO that I was talking about was around how you monitor your progress while you were doing the research. And one of the things that also answers Vinant's question is that we embed PMO in the process. So when we engage in any of those ASA steps, in the engagement, we stop and have moments of reflection. We ask people to write or tell stories. It's really important to pay attention to language. We have found the translation is quite limited. There's so much learning in how you actually are able to listen respectfully and richly to people. But you work at that during the project and you record that monitoring as you go. How you start to monitor what happens in the future, how effective it has been, I'm not sure. But if I was to think of the Tsitsa project has, through its funding, employed people we call community liaison officers who work with the project and the implementers and the communities. Now, it would seem to me that they would be well placed to carry on monitoring and evaluation. And my hope would be that out of this kind of work, government institutions would see places for job descriptions and posts, positions, work that involved people in monitoring and speaking out of their own communities. One of my real concerns in participatory governance is that when you hold a meeting, most people who come from formal institutions have a salary and have their costs of participation covered, whereas local people come at their own expense out of their own time. And because they are voluntary, and there's a whole literature around our catchment forums, I think it's a huge inequity, and we need some kind of government institutional response that supports participation, and that would go some way into your post-project monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tali. And then we've got Venant and Zibaza. Are we able to get Venant to come to the floor? Hi, Tamrin. Okay.
Yes, so he has permission to talk. We're just waiting for him to. There we go.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. My question was about the sustainability of the monitoring and evaluation as such, because Professor Tari mentioned that in order for the project to leave lasting impacts, it should have like a collaborative monitoring and evaluation. And as she was saying a few minutes ago, researchers, I mean, those who initiated the project, maybe they can be governments or NGOs, may just run out of money, and then the project may just stop. I mean, monitoring and evaluation also, because it takes time, it takes like convening meetings, again, go to the field to look how things are going, spending time doing things related to monitoring and evaluation, which may like cost some money, or just some people can change interests and move to other areas. And I'm wondering how we can just make sure that the monitoring and evaluation lasts very long possible. Yeah, that's my question.
All right, thank you so much, Venant. Tali, were you able to follow the question there? Also, I think the one that he's sort of like paraphrased, the one that he's put on the
chat room
box there.
Yes, Venant, thank you. Venant is a researcher on our project here in Rwanda. And once our travel arrangements are a little bit more open, I'm hoping to meet and work with him. I think what both you and the previous questioner have raised is this ethical question of we intervene. We open up questions and expectations and hopes among community members, and we disappear. And we don't stick around to even find out what happened from our intervention. And I don't have a neat answer to that. What I can do is say that in our research, what we are very clear about in our engagements is the limits of what we can actually offer. And what I personally do is to say to people as they come into our meetings, what I can't offer, because very often what is hoped for is not spoken. So I can't offer money or jobs or solutions. What we are offering is a space to learn more and to share your learning, and maybe to see opportunities to leverage advocacy, to leverage where you can ask for support, to monitor in your communities? And I know it's going to be accused of being a wishful dreamer quite often in my life, but I don't think there's a simple answer to either of those questions. But I think we have to remind ourselves of the questions all the time if we want to work ethically. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tali, for the response. We also have got Tanya Lane. Tanya, thank you for we still have, I think, a few more minutes, at least 10 minutes. So we're able to get Tanya also to come on board, Tamrin. Could we please put Tanya live?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Prof. Tali, thank you so much. It was really lovely to hear your work kind of in such a crystallized, focused form. And Pearl, who's a colleague of mine in SANBI, it was lovely to hear how this work is really brought to life through your work in the Umgeni. And listening to the two of you, actually, I know in the question box, I posed the question mainly to Tali, but listening to both of you, I had such a strong sense of how these roles of academic researcher and kind of implementation practitioner, for me, they're becoming quite blurred. And in some senses, you know, Tali, when I heard you saying, oh, you know, we need time to reflect, process and learn together, and it's such a challenge to get that is the challenge across the board. You know, as practitioners, we get incredibly frustrated that we don't have time to write as a way of learning out of our practice. I just wondered if the role of academia isn't changing through these developments. So that was my one question. And I, you know, because that knowledge is being developed so collaboratively and so together, and it isn't held in any one place, I did wonder if there isn't a real, and I don't know if that's what you mean by transgressive, like a boundary shift that's happening, where the role of academia is going to be more around facilitating learning than being the expert with the knowledge. That was my first question. Oh, I hope I haven't forgotten the second question again.
Maybe let's
sorry.
just to the first
too
question.
Much screen time. I'm going to leave it. Too much screen time. It was an important question, though. But yeah, yes. Leave it at that.
All right. Let maybe Tali respond.
Tanya, yes. To answer your question quite briefly, I think there are opportunities for those researchers who want to follow this, and it is a transgressive pathway. And there is a small community of people who want to do it and are doing it. And I think they will interact with the traditional academia, but yes, I think it's a vital role, and that universities could well be alerted to valuing it more highly. When you talk about time, I just want to say we never have time for important things. We only make time for it. So it has to go into our daily planning if we actually want to do it. Thanks so much.
I don't know if Tanya, you got the bit end there. Are you okay? All right.
Yeah, that was a great response. Thank you. Fantastic. I don't know if anyone has anything to add around that.
All right. We're just going to go to, because we're going to be running out of time now, we only have got 5 minutes left for what we've put aside. Maybe I should try and include Lee Diethe. Lee Diethe, are we able to get Lee Diethe to talk, Tamrin? To present we actually have got lots of people. Maybe the best thing at this point, given that we've got 5 minutes, let me just try and summarize them. And then Tali, are you able to read some of the questions on your screen? So maybe you can just respond to those, because we really have, we've run out of time actually. First Lee and then Penny. So Lee, for example, says that, thank you, I have enjoyed hearing and seeing your work. Regarding Prof. Tali Palmer's presentation, I am seeking clarification on slide number 22, the baseline axis is time. We read and hear about trying and hoping to finally make a meaningful difference, and it is about changing behaviors, and it will take decades. It will take 40 years to change behaviors. What are the actual timelines? This takes me to my observation that these interventions are detracting attention from those individuals, organizations, departments, and stakeholders who are morally, legally, and constitutionally responsible for and accountable in terms of the law. Tali, are you there?
Just a very personal response to that. I've worked at both ends of that. I've worked at the high level government crafting of policy and how government is responsible. And I think there are different windows of opportunity through history as to where you can be most effective. At the moment, in my personal circumstances, it's more effective for me to work at the very bottom level. I think the kind of collective challenge we follow means that where people find effective pathways into change is good. And I would not advocate only leaving it to government.
Yeah, and I see there, Penny, maybe that's going to be our last question. I just want to also say that this discussion continues. We've recorded this session and we're going to put it on our YouTube as well as Facebook channels. So we can continue having the discussion, putting comments there and responding to those. So Penny, are you there? Are we able to put Penny alive? If not, let me just say that thanks for the question. That's what Penny says, Tanya. So Penny is actually also responding to Tanya. You have articulated the questions that were in my mind regarding the tensions between theory and practice. To the presenters, how can scientists, ecologists doing the research find this balance to show that they are engaging? Maybe this is both, maybe this time around, we can start with you, Pearl. Do you have any responses to the question? Any thoughts?
Let me just, yeah, so how can academics or ecologists find, to show who? That would be my question. Because I think this kind of thing is embedded in how you work. So in my experience, so it's kind of pushed by the complex world around you that you have to engage. So I don't think you have to show anybody that you are engaging. You just have to engage because that is what the work requires. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah. So, you know, just because of time, that's perfect, Pel, thank you so much. And Tanya there has remembered her other question, and yeah, so she also speaks about some of the things that I said, the character-based approach. You know, reflecting about what both Tali and Pearl and everybody has said, it really shows me that history is probably one of the most important tools that needs to be a part of a process like this. Understanding the histories where our communities are coming from, in which we work, helps us not only in understanding how to engage them, how to deal with them, but also how to set up incentives, because it provides us with the kind of knowledge on what is valued in those communities and what is desired. So that could be one of the steps in which we co-learn, so that we are able to speak the same language and co-influence one another. And you're right that this is part of building character of the researcher in engaging with the context. Any closing comments from you, Tali, because we're going to close now?
I would like to thank you for inviting me and for the open to engagement, but thank you for rich and exciting questions. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. In closing the webinar, colleagues, thank you for joining us. You will find this recording on our webinar channels on the ISER YouTube channel, as well as other social medias, as I've said, tomorrow at the latest. We have to thank you. Thank Dr. Gola as well. And Anna, thank you so much. That was really adaptive response in rescuing some parts of our webinar there. Thanks for everybody who's joined us. You're welcome to reach the ISER through our contacts on the web. I would like to thank the whole team at the ISER, and Bulelani is our administrator. He would also be able to respond to many of your questions that you want to pose in future, also for possible collaborations with us. Thank you so much, and have a good morning further, or good day further. Thank you.